Hello and welcome back from the networking break. This is Tom Bechtold, of course, your host from Secure World Digital. Up next, we have Guardians of the Ballot Box, Cybersecurity in Elections. And this is with Mr. Hemanth Tadepalli. He's the Cybersecurity and Compliance Engineer over at May Mobility. He's going to be unpacking his work that he's been doing with election security over the past few years. And what a timely topic this is, right? So we've got obviously our election year coming up here, and we've got a lot of stuff to be concerned about. And Hemanth is going to unpack some of those threats and offer some suggestions on how election officials and the folks that are in charge of the security for these can actually get their arms around it. So that being said, Hemanth, the floor is yours, sir.
For sure. Thank you so much. I really appreciate Secure World for inviting me to. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. Our discussion will cover a range amount of topics, especially important topics at the intersection of cybersecurity, elections, and voting. We'll start off today with a brief introduction to really set the stage for a conversation. And then we'll delve into the intersection of cybersecurity and elections, where we really explore how these two critical areas converge. From there, we'll go ahead and discuss the challenges and issues faced in securing elections, followed by some historical case studies that are going to be helping us really understand into the insights of past incidents and their implications. From there, we'll go ahead and move on to the problems of disinformation and misinformation campaigns, which is super important, especially as we delve into the area of AI and cybersecurity. And from there, we'll pivot on to deepfake campaigns. After that, we'll examine the voting machine, its importance, and the vulnerabilities associated with it. This will kind of lead us into a broader look at the threat landscape and vulnerabilities, present in the current election infrastructure. So to address these issues, I'll share some best practices and recommendations for really enhancing the election security. Finally, we'll wrap up with a discussion on the future outlook, where we'll consider how emerging technologies and a lot of these strategies can really help us secure elections moving forward. So with that, let's get started with our first topic here. So, imagine waking up on election day, right? And you find out that the results have been tampered with. The first question that comes to our mind is if our democracy is at risk. Elections are the cornerstone of any democracy, and their integrity is very vital to our society. So drawing on from my experience, I've had the privilege of serving in government, both at the local levels. For example, while working at the state level, I was involved in initiatives to make elections secure and to combat the spread of misinformation and disinformation. I've also had the opportunity to run and lead both local, state, and federal campaigns, which really gave me the firsthand look at the operational challenges and the importance of secure election practices. Additionally, my previous work experience at Mandiant, which is now part of Google, it's a big, large, leading cybersecurity firm. It's really taught me and given me the knowledge and skills to really address these threats effectively. I was really involved with analyzing and mitigating cyber threats, provided me the unique perspective of the different tactics used by malicious actors. In 2020, Mandy reported a significant increase in phishing campaigns and ransomware attacks, targeting election officials and infrastructures. And this really emphasized the need for continuous vigilance across the whole global landscape. So as we move on here, let's kind of talk about the critical intersection between cybersecurity and elections. This topic is actually a lot more relevant than ever because we've been seeing an increase in attempts to disrupt and influence democratic processes through cyber means. So during the 2020 elections, there were over 100,000 cyber attacks targeting election infrastructure across the country and across the world. And so a lot of these attacks range from attempts to basically breach voter databases to efforts that were really aimed towards compromising the systems that are tallying votes. So the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, they actually noted that these threats came from all sorts of sources, including nation-state actors, criminal groups, individual hackers. And there was like a staggering number of these threats that were been highlighting the urgent need for cybersecurity measures to protect the electoral integrity. So when it really comes down to election security, there are several key factors that we need to consider. There's one, protecting the privacy of voters, because its personal information is kept confidential and secure. And according to a 2020 report by the Brennan Center of Justice, data breaches in voter registration systems can actually lead to identity theft and voter suppression. Number two, which is really important here, is guaranteeing secrecy. We need to ensure that voters' choices remain private and undisclosed. This is crucial for maintaining voter confidence in the secrecy of their ballot. Lastly, we talk about anonymity and integrity because we need to maintain anonymous information of voters while ensuring and making sure that the integrity of voting process is secure. The Election Assistance Commission actually emphasized that maintaining the integrity of voting process involves not only securing systems, but also ensuring accurate and transparent vote counting. So at the end of this day, why does it matter? In our increase of interconnected digital world, right, we see that the security of our elections has direct and profound implications for the future of our nation. A breach in election security can not only alter the outcome of an election, but also erode public trust in the democratic process. So according to a 2020 Pew Research Center statistic, only 59% of Americans were confident that votes would be accurately counted. And this reflected a widespread concern about election security. That being said, it's really imperative that we take these threats seriously and work diligently to really safeguard our electoral systems. So with this understanding, let's go ahead and move on and kind of talk about the specific challenges and issues that we face in securing elections. So now we're looking at the intersection of cybersecurity. It is a hot topic, right? So let's take a look at state-sponsored actors. These are government organizations, contractors, and others working for the government. So they pose the most serious risk to our elections. These actors combine resources and cyber intrusion techniques with basically disruptive capabilities and information operations. They leverage a lot of these state media to amplify their activities. Now, they benefit from long planning cycles, significant resources, and just special expertise in this sector. Their operations are actually more carried out from various reasons, right? They rarely aim to directly impact the voting process or the tabulation of results. Then we actually have cybercrime. These are financially motivated actors that might not really care about the elections themselves, but will target election-related systems just because they can actually make money from it. Ransomware and extortion operations are common, and criminals often sell compromised data or access, on underground forums. And so the election-related organizations and systems make these targets more likely. We talk about hacktivists. These are another groups to consider. These are ideologically or politically motivated individuals who have been attacked election-related targets on several occasions. Their activities are often linked to foreign conflict or domestic controversies. So typically, these are more of a situation where they cause only superficial impacts, like temporarily disrupting election-related websites, for example. Next, we talk about insider threats as one of the biggest challenges and issues. These actually have been a growing concern for election officials. Insiders have privileged access. They make them significant risk. And so this includes malicious insiders like employees, looking to steal data or even sabotage, and unintentional insiders who might make mistakes or fall victim to phishing attacks. Lastly, we have information operations as a service. We see public relation firms that have been documented using deceptive tactics during elections to basically promote or criticize candidates or issues. A lot of these tactics include coordinated social media advocacy, comment brigading, and even operating fake accounts. Examples like the high energy and doppelganger campaigns show how these operations can be conducted on behalf of nation states. So as we move on here, over the past few years, there have been a lot of talk about how cyber attacks can mess with democracy. And experts are especially worried about how disinformation boosted by AI is becoming a huge threat as we head into a major election campaign for not just the US, but over the world. So let's take a look at some of these examples from recent history to see what's been happening. So just last year, in August of 2023, the UK's Electoral Commission was hit by hostile actors in a pretty complex cyber attack. And so hackers actually got into internal emails and voter data, raising a big question about security of their elections. Back in 2016, the US presidential election, WikiLeaks dropped a bombshell by publishing 58,000 hacked emails from John Podesta, who was Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman. And so this was actually the most talked about cyber attacks of that election, really putting the spotlight on how vulnerable campaigns can be. Then there was May of 2014, the Ukrainian presidential election. There was a group called Cybersecurity, believed to be actually a pro-Russian hacktivist group. They claimed they hacked the Ukrainian Central Election Commission. So they messed up with the systems, destroyed vital data, they leaked information, they launched DDoS attacks, and they even tried to post fake election results on the CEC website. So the Ukrainian officials think that this was just some random group, but was backed by Russian state cyber operators. In 2020, Iranian actors went after multiple US state voter registration sites. They used stolen voter info to send threatening emails and social media messages, pretending to be also known as the Proud Boys, trying to scare officials and voters. They also made a video with stolen data to falsely claim they were weaknesses in the US election systems. On election day, they tried to use a hacked media outlet to spread more false information. US authorities linked this to an Iranian company with ties to the government. So as you can see, a lot of these stories just show just how serious and varied cyber threats to elections can be. They highlight the need for strong cybersecurity measures to keep our elections safe and trustworthy. Now, from the historical context, I think it's really important here to really talk about the topic of misinformation and disinformation in elections, which have been actually major concerns in the recent years. So misinformation, to define here, misinformation is basically bad information that you thought was true. It's like spreading a rumor you believe is accurate, but really isn't. Disinformation, on the other hand, is bad information that you know isn't true. This is done deliberately to mislead people at the end of the day. The impact of misinformation and disinformation on elections is significant. So according to a study by the Pew Research Center, 64% of Americans say that fake news has caused a great deal of confusion about basic facts of current events. Now, the cybersecurity of non-voting systems is just as critical to integrity of the vote. So imagine that the chaos if a cyber attacker were to successfully target state voter registration systems at a crucial time. Actually, we got a glimpse of this a few years ago. On the last day of election to register, Floridians wanted to register, and pop star Ariana Grande tweeted out a reminder to her followers. And so this caused a traffic spike up to 1.1 million requests per hour, which was overwhelming the system. So to prevent the spread of election-related disinformation and propaganda on its platforms, we actually see Meta this past year that has invested over $20 billion in safety and security since 2016. And this was according to the whole exact tech giant that it came from. And so its global team dedicated this effort consists of around 40,000 people, including 15,000 content reviewers. So a lot of these examples that I talked about really show how both misinformation and disinformation, along with cyber vulnerabilities, can really create a significant disruption in the electoral process. So according to the Stanford Internet Observatory, misinformation and disinformation on social media reach millions of users, and so influencing public perception and the trust in the election process overall. So as we move on here, one of the biggest things what we've been seeing, especially, is deepfake campaigns, right? These have been increasingly really prevalent in the realm of election interface because deepfakes in conjunction with misinformation and misinformation play a significant role in spreading false narratives at the end of the day and misleading information during election cycles. So currently, the industry refers this to as an AI election year. Because deepfake technology, powered by AI, has reached a level where it can basically manipulate audio and video content to make it seem like someone said or did something they never actually did. So this poses a serious threat to the integrity of elections, as false information can spread rapidly and undermine trust in the whole democratic process. So despite that threat, the Federal Election Commission has yet to actually take a significant action to address deepfakes. However, recognizing the potential dangers, there have been several states that have passed legislation regulating deepfakes. We've been seeing at least 39 our states are considering or have already passed measures that have been aimed at increasing transparency regarding AI-generated deepfake political advertisements. One example of deepfake usage in elections actually occurred during India's parliamentary elections this past year and in 2019. Political parties and candidates were actually accused of using deepfake videos to spread false information and manipulate public opinion. So these videos often circulated on social media platforms such as WhatsApp, you've seen Facebook, Instagram, and they've been targeted rival candidates and wanted to discredit them using fabricated content. And so deepfake technology has also been used in other countries to create fake news stories and manipulate public perception. A study by the cybersecurity firm DeepTrace actually found that deepfake videos have doubled in the previous years, with over 15,000 videos online. And so this growth of exponential deepfake videos kind of underscores the urgent need for regulatory measures and technological solutions to combat the spread of deepfakes. So as we navigate through this AI election year, it's really essential to remain vigilant and cautious about the information that we consume, because public awareness and media literacy are key in really identifying and debunking deepfake content. Additionally, policymakers must take a really big step right now to regulate and mitigate the harmful effects of deepfake technology on the entire electoral process. So as we move on here, so let's talk about electronic voting machines and the critical role cybersecurity plays in really ensuring the integrity of our elections. Electronic voting machines currently in use across several states have been found to have serious security vulnerabilities from many researchers. For example, last year, the University of Michigan, one of the professors, they identified multiple severe security flaws in the Georgia's Dominion voting system's touchscreen voting machines. These vulnerabilities actually could basically allow malicious actors to install harmful software either through the physical access at polling places or even remotely from election management systems. So this could lead to the alteration of votes from bypassing established procedural protections at the end of the day. One of the most crucial ways to secure electronic voting systems is by using equipment that generates a paper record of every vote cast. However, not all states are currently requiring this, so paper records serve as a backup and enable manual audits to confirm vote tallies in case of suspected manipulation. So without the safeguard, electronic systems can be vulnerable to basically be tampered without leaving any trace. We also need to consider here the single point of failure in this case of a electronic voting system if that fails. So a compromise or malfunction of election technology could actually potentially influence the outcome of presidential elections. And this highlights the high stakes involved. And between elections, these devices may be stored in locations where there could be compromised. Additionally, any pathway for installing new software, such as through USB ports, could actually lead to corrupt updates, rendering the system untrustworthy. So weak system design is another concern. Without clear guidelines and expert evaluation, election systems are vulnerable to various expected and unexpected cyber attacks. So as we move here to the next slide, so let's take a closer look here, right? At the flow of information that you see on the screen and the vulnerabilities present in our election systems. So the arrows represent the direction of information flow between component systems. So the solid lines indicate flows typically relying on the internet or connected networks, while dashed lines depict information flows typically isolated from external networks. The dark blue box represents the systems typically deployed in individual polling places, while the gray box indicates systems centralized in a local jurisdiction's election office. So let's unpack some key points here. So we talk about aging infrastructure because many voting machines in use today are at least 10 to 20 years old, and there's a lot of sense that they are lacking modern security features. There's a lack of federal security standards because voting machine manufacturers aren't subject to federally mandate security standards, and this leaves them vulnerable to exploitation. There's a lot of outdated testing standards. So the federal testing standards actually have not been updated since 2005, or at least the early 2000s, where this was a time where when digital machines were basically scarce. Internet connectivity and USB ports have been crucial here too, because many voting systems connect to the internet or have open USB ports. And so this provides potential entry points for malicious actors. There's also been failures in accuracy because some newer voting machines have failed to accurately record voter choices, and this really raises a concern about the reliability. So let's break down a little further here for the typical flow of election machines. So the ballot design here, right? So each election's new ballot is designed, and this is kind of set of the instructions of voting machines. Printing and scanning is another one because voters make the choices, and the ballots are printed and scanned by machines at polling places. We talk about tabulation. Scanners send the results to a tabulator situated at a central location, and this is where results are aggregated and tabulated. So it's worth noting here that a few years ago, there was a push to move away from paper ballots in favor of digital-only voting machines. However, the shortcomings of paperless voting actually has provided evidence, and it's been leading to the passage of the SAFE Act in 2019, which actually mandates the use of paper as a backup. So while many counties and states have purchased new voting machines in compliance with the SAFE Act, some of these products actually still have to go through still have security gaps and that have to be addressed. So these vulnerabilities that I've talked about really talk about the importance of modernizing our election infrastructure and implementing really good security measures to safeguard the integrity of our democratic process. As we move on here to the next slide, I think it's time now that we talk about the threat landscape and vulnerabilities in elections. Understanding the risks that lurk with our electoral processes. So crashing election office and campaign websites has been one of the most significant vulnerability, and it lies around the whole realm of cybersecurity because targeting election office websites or even campaign platforms can disrupt operations, and they can render information inaccessible or even altered. And so distributed denial of service attacks, DDoS attacks, for example, they overload servers, making websites unreachable for actual legitimate users. So this not only hampers communication and voter information access, but also impacts public perception of the electoral process. Cyber attacks on voter registration databases is another one because it poses a big threat when it comes down to these databases, because a lot of them are compromised with voter information, manipulate records, or even disenfranchise voters by altering or deleting entries. So a lot of these attacks disrupt the electoral process and really erode the trust and fairness of security of elections. We talk about campaigns, and I've talked about this earlier, is that breaches of campaign-related social media is just another vulnerability. It's been actually occurring a lot more throughout the local level as well as the state and federal level. Unauthorized access to these accounts and basically lead to the disinformation of false or damaging information and influencing public perception of candidates or parties. Hackers may exploit these platforms to spread misinformation and even damage reputations. So the global threat landscape in election and cybersecurity is diverse with basically various actors and tactics overall. State-sponsored actors, cyber criminal, hacktivists, insiders, and information operations entities have posed a significant risk. So among these, state-sponsored actors are particularly concerning, combining their cyber intrusion techniques with disruptive capabilities and even information operations. So while some of these threat actors target election-related infrastructures like voting machines and voter registries, others focus on a major player in campaigning, political parties, news, and social media. Interestingly, cyber operations that are often target these entities actually more frequently than actual election infrastructures. So at the end of the day, securing elections demands basically a comprehensive understanding of various threat vectors, from DDoS attacks to deepfakes, likely to impact elections in 2024, so this year. It's really essential to recognize a lot of these threats and tactics involved and ensure the best mitigation strategies to address the full spectrum of potential activity. As we dig in a little further here, particularly focus on state-sponsored cyber threat actors and their tactics. State-sponsored cyber threat actors often target election-related infrastructure for various reasons. Although their primary objective is to rarely direct interface with the election results or voting process, this kind of stems from the significant risk of retaliation and escalation. This leads to most states to constrain their activity. Instead, they actually aim to achieve other objectives, like applying pressure on other governments regarding specific issues or even influencing foreign policy outcomes, retaliating for previous disputes between countries, or even amplifying issues and causing in foreign countries that align with their own national interests. For example, APT41 conducted a large-scale vulnerability exploitation and scanning activities that basically compromised the U.S. government organizations ahead of the 2020 and 2022 U.S. election cycles. So this was just a demonstration of the ongoing efforts of state-sponsored actors to infiltrate critical systems during sensitive periods. In another instance, New Zealand, announced in March of 2024 that APT40 compromised its parliamentary council office and parliamentary services in 2021. And so there is a high assessment with high confidence that APT40 also compromised the website of Cambodia's National Election Commission in the mid-2018. So a lot of this assessment is based on the use of airbrake malware, which overlaps with previously identified infrastructure and consistent targeting. So let's take a look at UNC 4713. So UNC 4713 targeted attendees of the 2023 G7 summit in Hiroshima with the spear phishing messages. The campaign used a basic compromisation of Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs G20 account to send the phishing messages. And so recipients included individuals from Australia, Canada, India, Italy, Singapore, and even the UK. So while this targeting is not election specific, it represents recent interest in capacity to really target the government organizations in a number of countries holding elections in 2024. Lastly, here to wrap up, APT28 is another one. This is also known as Fancy Bear. This is a sophisticated and well-known Russian state-sponsoring hacking group. This group actually has been attributed to various cyber attacks, including those targeting governments, political organizations, and critical infrastructure. APT28 is actually believed to have been involved in cyber operations aimed at influencing elections and conducting espionage activities. We talk about Sandworm. This is another notorious state-sponsored hacking group linked to the Russian government. This group gained significant attention for its involvement in various cyber attacks past few years, including the disruption of Ukraine's power grid in 2015. So Sandworm is actually known for its highly technical and advanced cyber capabilities, and has actually been associated with the cyber espionage and cyber warfare activities across the country and the world. And so a lot of these incidents really highlight the persistent and evolving nature of state-sponsored cyber threats that have been targeting election infrastructure worldwide. And that's why it's really important here is that, a lot of these motivations that these threat actors, it's important to understand it because it's crucial for developing effective defense strategies and safeguarding the integrity of the electoral process. So as we move on here for best practices, it's really important that we talk about this because the election officials employed to secure the dedicated computer basically used for designing ballots and compiling election results. So we talk about location and access control. Now, it's crucial to keep the election computer in a location with restricted access, obviously. Now, a lot of this includes implementing locks with documented entry and key card systems, along with video surveillance to monitor any unauthorized access attempts. We talk about network isolation too, because never connect the election computer to the internet or any other external networks. Keeping it isolated really reduces the risk of unauthorized access or cyber intrusions. We also talk about user authentication and access control. Because it's important to provide users with unique logins, strong passwords, and access only to the minimum functions needed to perform their duties. This helps prevent unauthorized users from gaining access to sensitive election data. We also have audit log reviews. Just like in corporate America, it's important to practice this as well from the election standpoint. Routinely reviewing audit logs for all users who log into the computer or even monitor the actions that they perform. A lot of this helps detect any suspicious activities or unauthorized access attempts in the real time. Validating the computer software is important because it helps us to ensure that it's not been modified or tampered with. Doing those regular checks help maintain the integrity of the system and mitigate the risk of malware or unauthorized modifications. And so by following these best practices, I believe election officials can enhance the security of their dedicated computers used for critical election processes. And so securing this infrastructure is essential for maintaining the integrity and trustworthiness of the electoral process. So as we conclude here to the future outlook, looking forward, the intersection of elections and cybersecurity really demands our careful consideration and proactive measure to uphold the integrity of the democratic process. So as cyber threats evolve, it becomes imperative to develop a really comprehensive defense strategy. In the realm of just cyber warfare, attacks aimed at undermining trust in elections really comes in different forms. A lot of these includes direct assault on campaign security. We talked about hacking and email leaks, or targeting critical election infrastructure, such as voter registration websites. Notably, state-sponsored actors with Russia frequently implicated, contribute to a lot of this disruption of the electoral process. And so securing elections against cyber threats requires a multifaceted approach, incorporating robust software security measures, routine assessments, really collaborative efforts among many stakeholders. It's really essential to underscore that safeguarding elections is a collective endeavor at the end of the day. Strengthening cybersecurity protocols, fostering information sharing on emerging threats, and investing in resilient technologies that are really pivotal steps in fortifying the electoral systems against evolving risks. Ultimately, for the democratic elections, it relies on just the collective commitment to maintaining transparency, the fairness and security in the digital era. So let us, remain vigilant, really bolster our defenses and preserve the democratic cornerstones of our society going forward. So as I conclude here, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. This is the best place for me to work with you, talk about cybersecurity threats and ways that we can minimize it for upcoming years. Again, thank you so much, Secure World, for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for a great presentation. Really enlightening. I really hope folks were taking notes on that slide where you have the best practices. The no internet connection, I think, is obviously crucial so that people can't get in there. So appreciate that diagram. I've got a couple questions for you. If you don't mind, do you have any evidence or anything that points to anything prior to 2016 of what was happening with like war? I mean, I have to believe that somewhere in history this has happened before, but what do you have from prior to 2016?
Yeah, I think the biggest things that we've been seeing is really looking at specifically with the state-sponsored actors, but deepfakes. Deepfakes have actually originated around just the early 2000s with, videos being morphed into one another, people actually endorsing other candidates for specific reasons and bills being passed. I think deepfakes and AI is now on the rise with, I guess, a lot more communication between other stakeholders. But especially, I would say, in the 2014 or even 2015 era, I believe that a lot of those deepfakes originated then for false information, misinformation, disinformation at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, we saw lots of that stuff, even with just like mundane stuff like television commercials. Because as memory serves, there was like a large beverage manufacturer. I won't say who it was, but they had like John Wayne on there, and John Wayne's been dead for a couple decades now, but it looked pretty good. So I mean, this stuff has been around for a bit. Misinformation is definitely not new because people have been mudslinging and lying about their competitors for forever. Probably since even when we came from Europe and everywhere else. But what threats do you worry about most in this upcoming election? Give me one or two.
For sure, definitely. I appreciate that. That's a great question. I think one of the biggest things that we really need to take into consideration, I believe it's APT 28. I talked about how this was also known as Fancy Bear, but it's a well-known Russian state-sponsored hacking group. And a lot of the threats that have been coming, especially hitting the United States, have been around the European and the Russian area. APT 28 is just one example, but it really comes down to how artificial intelligence has been the minds of individuals observing this information. When I served on the Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, on her task force to mitigate the combat of misinformation and disinformation on college campuses, it's actually the Gen Zers, as they actually have a big sway in the election this year. They have a big voice. We've been seeing with the recent news of how they are the future of democracy. A lot of them are actually running. We have people that are just in their 20s or 30s that are running for office. But they're not the threat. It's mainly how are they going to receive the right and proper information at the end of the day, right? And that's where I think college campuses, especially with a lot of universities having their organizations, is where can they help students understand the real information and not pass the disinformation.
I don't know if everybody's tired of me saying this, but there is a difference between truth and fact. And we need to learn what that is because there is a huge difference. So anyway, thank you for that. I appreciate that. As we wrap up, what's one point that you want to re-drive home or just kind of reiterate to folks out there that are watching us today?
Absolutely, Tom. I think that's a great question. Really factual check what you're reading and listening about. If you hear something that somebody is saying and you believe it is not right, do some research, right? Because every vote matters at the end of the day. It doesn't depend if it's on a bill or a policy or someone running for office. Your vote matters. And I would also want to add this too: is make sure to go vote. Don't be scared of voting. That is how your voice is heard. We are trying our best just from the cybersecurity sector to secure your vote. But I think it's your job too to do your research and really understand what's real and what's fake.
Couldn't agree more, my friend. Love it. Good answer. Reach out to Hemanth if you have any additional questions, or if you just want to know this guy on LinkedIn. He's obviously got good information. He can help you with securing elections. So if you're in this space and you're scratching your head or you're thinking, I need some help around this stuff, reach out. His QR code's right there on the screen. You can't get much better help than that when it's offered, right? So please take him up on this stuff. And I want to say thank you for a great presentation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We've got a networking break coming up here in just a moment, and then more sessions on the way. So we've got more stuff for you guys to learn about today at the East Coast virtual conference. So this concludes Guardians of the Ballot Box, Cybersecurity and Elections with Hemanth Tadepalli. Thank you, sir. We'll see everybody at the next round of sessions.
Thank you so much.